welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am your host, Jessica, and I am here with an author who you have made a series, which is a fun romp into cryptozoology and a little bit of mystery, and it's super, super fun. This current one is the fourth in the series, correct?
Correct.
And it is called Monster in the Moonlight. And I am really excited to be talking to you about it. So why don't you, for the audience, introduce yourself and tell us about the series, which now has become this book.
Okay. Well, my real name is actually Beth Amos, but I do write under pseudonyms, two of them, the current one being Annelise Ryan. And it's a long story as to how those came about. But I used to tell people, since I'm a retired ER nurse, that it was because I didn't think my ER patients would be comfortable knowing I spent my spare time thinking up fun ways to kill people. But anyway, the Annelise Ryan books, I actually have 14 other books outside of this series that were written as Annelise Ryan, also mysteries. And this series came about because those series kind of came to an end. And my agent and I were having some discussions about something different to do. And he asked me, we were trying to come up with some ideas, and he asked me what some of my favorite television shows were. And the first thing out of my mouth was The X-Files. And as soon as I said that, I said, hey, how about a character who's a cryptozoologist? And he loved that idea. And then we discussed this some more, and that's kind of how the series was born. And then the editors that we pitched it to at Berkeley had a question about whether I would be staying in Wisconsin with it, because apparently Wisconsin is popular amongst mystery readers. And so they wanted to know if I was going to be staying in Wisconsin or would I have to go outside of Wisconsin, because I'd already given them a summary in the first 50 pages of the first book, which clearly took place in Wisconsin, a death in Door County. And I told them that I could stay in Wisconsin for a fairly long time because, oddly enough, we have quite a few cryptids here. And they wanted some examples. And so I gave them, Bigfoot. And then I mentioned the hodag, and they said, the what? And I heard keys tapping in the background, and they were like, oh my God, what is that? So then the Beast of Bray Road, and there's Thunderbirds and all kinds of other things here in the States. So for the time being, my cryptozoologist is staying in Wisconsin, and her, like I said, her first investigation was looking for a Loch Ness type monster in Lake Michigan. And then the second one was hunting for a homicidal Bigfoot in the Chequamegon National Forest up around Bayfield and Lake Superior. The third one took place in Rhinelander, where the hodag is famous. If you ever go to Rhinelander, you cannot turn around without seeing a hodag. They're on signs and statues, and they're everywhere. And they're also the school mascot. And the fourth book takes place in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, and it's about the Beast of Bray Road, which is a very real it's a bit of Wisconsin lore that was big back in the late 80s and early 90s, because there were a ton of sightings that happened at the time. So it's supposed to be a werewolf / dogman type of creature.
So first of all, Morgan is the child of cryptozoologists, right?
Yes.
So that is, she being our protagonist that is her background. I do love the fact that these are, like some of the cryptids we're more aware of. Like most people hear about Bigfoot. My director's son has actually been in several Bigfoot call contests, which I had no idea that was a thing, but it is. And the hodag, I know what that is, but most people have no idea. Right?
I had no idea until I moved to Wisconsin. I had no idea what a hodag was.
Could you just for the audience, if you have not read any of these books before. Or you don't know what a hodag is. Could you please describe from that point
Well,
of view?
it's kind of interesting actually how the whole idea of the hodag came about, because back in the early 1900s or late 1890s, there were a lot of lumberjacks working in the Rhinelander area because it's a big lumber industry spot. And most of them, a lot of them came from Germany or from German parents, German descendants. And in Germany, there were these folklore stories about creatures that lived in the woods. And the hodag was something actually Germany knew about. And so they kind of brought that story with them. And a man named Eugene Shepard, who was a lumberjack and apparently bored, wanted to make things more interesting, decided that he was going to play a little prank on the townsfolk of Rhinelander. And he and a couple of his buddies got some different animal parts, and they sort of burned them a little and trashed them a little and piled them all up. And they took them into Rhinelander and dumped them in the city and said, look what we found. We found this huge, terrible creature called a hodag. And it was so ferocious that the only way that we could capture it was to blow it up with dynamite. How convenient. And so these are the pieces and parts of it. And so the townsfolk were like, okay, yeah, hodag, we'll go along with it for a little while, but it never really took off. And so a few years later, Eugene Shepard decided he wanted to give it another try. And he went ahead and had a friend of his make a wooden mold, and then took a bunch of different animal skins and put them on there, some animal parts and put them on there, and then got a booth at the Oneida County Fair. And he and his sons ran the booth, and his sons were hidden back behind a curtain behind this creature, which was very dimly lit. And they had wires, thin wires attached to it, and they would move the wires and they would make noises. And Eugene Shepard charged people money to come in and see this hodag. He said he'd finally captured one alive, and it was a huge hit. I mean, a big thing, and it made it into the paper in Rhinelander, and then it made it into the state newspaper, and then the national newspapers got wind of it. And once they did, so did the Smithsonian. And the Smithsonian finally sent a letter to Rhinelander and said, hey, this is some new creature here. We need to come out and document this. So we're coming. And that's when Eugene Shepard had to admit that, okay, wait a minute, it's not real. So the people of Rhinelander could have been really pissed off about that somebody pulled this hoax on them. But rather than getting ticked off, they just decided they were going to embrace it. And they adopted the hodag kind of as their city mascot. And they have quite literally adopted it everywhere. I mean, it's all the businesses, the schools, their signs, their statues. Outside the Chamber of Commerce, there's a great big huge statue. It's one of the first things you see coming into town. And it supposedly has the face of a frog. It's got horns down its back. It's got claws on its feet and kind of a dinosaur, stegosaur sort of body, and a spiked tail, and red eyes. It's quite ugly looking, actually. And supposedly it's very ferocious. So that's the best way I can describe the hodag, other than go to Rhinelander, because you'll see all kinds of hodags in Rhinelander.
So that's really funny because I figured, and I love this so much. I was like, like describing what a hodag looked like, but that history, I had no idea. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm aware, the Loch Ness Monster, for instance, is the one in Michigan, is that Champy? I know they all have different names.
Champ is in Lake Champlain in New
Okay.
York.
Yeah.
And I think there are several in the Great Lakes. I can't remember what the names of them are right off the top of my head. There's one in Chesapeake Bay called Chessie.
There's one in the Finger Lakes too, and I can't remember what
that's Champ, I think.
that is Champy.
Lake
Okay,
Champlain
that
is
would
right
make
next to the
that
Finger
would make
Lakes.
sense. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and up in the Northwest, little British Columbia area, I think in Okanagan or somewhere up in that area, there's one called Ogopogo, which doesn't fit in with the other nomenclature, but yeah, they're all over the place.
Yeah, no, it's super fun, and I do enjoy just the lore around these. So the Beast of Bray Road, that sounds
Mhm.
hyper specifically local. Tell us a little bit about how Morgan comes into this particular mystery involved with the Beast of Bray Road. And then if you could just give us a little history about what that looks like for locals.
Okay, so it kind of is very local and kind of not, because the Beast of Bray Road, what happened was there were a bunch of sightings back in the late 80s, early 90s, from a variety of people, some of whom were very worthy, observers of things, not likely to make up stories about stuff like this, reporting this beast that they kept seeing in and around the area of Elkhorn, which is where Bray Road is, and Bray Road itself. And some people even said that this creature came out and chased their car. One person said there were claw marks on the car. There were no actual human deaths from this creature, but there were some livestock deaths that were kind of suspicious and unexplainable. And so it became a big enough story that the editor of the local newspaper, and like a weekly rag, told one of his reporters, "I want you to look into this." I'm not sure she was too excited about the assignment initially, but she went ahead and did it. Her name was Linda Godfrey, and she wrote up not only the newspaper articles, but she ended up writing an entire book about the Beast of Bray Road. And she said she went into it a complete skeptic and came out the other end an amateur cryptozoologist. And she firmly believed that these people had seen something. She wasn't sure what it was, but she thought they had seen something. And there were reports outside of the Elkhorn area, also in other areas of Wisconsin. And there are reports of like dogmen, is the best way I can describe them, in other parts of the country. Like Michigan actually has very famous dogmen sightings up there. So it is kind of localized, but not really. And the people of Elkhorn, it's a very small town. It's a town that is very picturesque, with a cute little downtown main street, a huge park, some great architecture. And it's beautiful enough that a fellow who took some pictures of it one year around Christmas time in the winter actually had those pictures chosen by a company, I forget the name of it, to be depicted on Christmas cards as, your typical, this is like 1950s, 1960s, hometown America Christmas, pictures. So Elkhorn took that and adopted that, themselves as the Christmas card city. So they have a huge Christmas celebration every year. They call themselves the Christmas card city. They have a Christmas card parade. I mean, it's their thing. So you have the contrast of this history of being this beautiful, scenic, little tiny town in Wisconsin, picturesque enough to be on a Christmas card, and then this Beast of Bray Road story that also is in the town. So it's kind of two extremes here. And, which one do they want to admit to? Which one would they rather not? So the local people don't really talk about it some. The people that I did get to talk about it treated it as just kind of a fun folklore kind of thing. But I have to tell you that driving down Bray Road, initially, we did it during the daytime. It seems like a very ordinary road, and it's farmland. And the further we went down it, the shadier it got, but it still was just your typical kind of country road. Driving it at night was a whole different story. It was pretty creepy. And there was mist on the one night that we went through there, and there were some weird sounds. I'm sure there were owls and other things, but it definitely was a little bit creepy. And maybe that's because we already knew the story of the Beast of Bray Road. There was also a movie made in 2001, I want to say, that is a very, very, very low budget horror film. And if you have an hour and a half of time that you want to waste one day, I'd go ahead and watch it. It's a fun little campy, B quality, if you can even give it a B quality movie. But yeah, I mean, you can see like the LA freeways in the background, even though it's supposed to be in Wisconsin, but it's that kind of movie. But it's an interesting twist, and there is a lot of it plays very hard on the werewolf concept of the Beast of Bray Road.
Yeah.
Even though those sightings in the 80s and 90s happened, if you read Linda Godfrey's book, she actually found out that there was a gentleman by the name of Shackleman, I forget his first name, who was a groundskeeper at the Coletta Institute, which was like a hospital for the insane in a nearby town. And back in the 1920s, And he had actually seen this creature himself one night when he was out making his rounds on the ground, sitting on top of an old Indian burial mound and digging like crazy. And he scared it off. And then the next night it showed up again. And he never told anybody about it except for his family members. And it was his son, when Linda Godfrey published her stories in the newspaper, who came up to her and said, you think that this is a new and recent sighting, but it's not, because my father saw this way back in the 1920s, 29, I think it was, or so. So there's an interesting history of that in there. And there's also an interesting history in that area of stuff that went on during the Prohibition era and bootlegging, with connections to Al Capone. And so some of that kind of ties into the story as well. I like pulling Wisconsin history into these stories, and there's just so much of it, everything from circuses to shipwrecks and buried treasures and sunken treasures and bootlegging and mobsters. It's just, yeah, an interesting variety.
So a few things that sort of kind of occur in this book, or specifically part of this deals with the mystery surrounding the murders of Morgan's parents. When you start writing a series, I mean, you've obviously, like you said, you had 14 other books under this particular pseudonym. When you started this new series, was it difficult for you to sort of like, did you always know where certain beats were going to come up? And like, were you like, well, if I'm going to tackle this particular storyline, it's not going to be until the fourth book. Like, is it difficult for you to sort of pace yourself wanting to mix in enough with the fun cryptozoologist stuff to whet people's appetite to keep them reading? Or do you find it, like easy? Are you, very like in your mind, do you separate them by arcs, which you think are going to be books?
Um, I'm not sure how to answer that. Let's see. So the idea of her parents, the revelation that her parents were murdered comes out in the first book, and that the fact that her fiance, a man that she dated and became engaged to kind of as a rebellious act against her parents, who were overly protective because they're quite wealthy and were worried about her safety, that fiance apparently killed her parents. And by the fourth book, there are some things that happen that make her start to question whether or not that's true. So it just kind of flips the whole idea on its head. And that is something that back with the first book I had in mind. And it was an idea that because I only had a contract for, I think, two books initially. And I thought, well, if they don't do any more books, then I just won't ever use that storyline, and we'll just assume that he did kill her parents. But if I get the chance, I think I'm going to explore that and just put a little doubt in there. I think characters make the story more than the monsters. I mean, the monsters are fun, but I do think the characters are what really make a story. And so trying to come up with characters who are complex, who have interesting backgrounds, who are flawed, and have problems in their lives. I mean, none of us are perfect or have perfect lives. And I think sharing that with the readers, or letting readers know that, is a big part of it. For me, every fiction that I read is character driven. I read for the characters more than I do the story for the most part. There's a few exceptions, like like Jurassic Park. When I read Jurassic Park, it was totally the story, not the characters, that suckered me in, the whole concept of the dinosaurs and the DNA and all that. So occasionally you can come up with such a great concept for a story that's what really sells it. But for the most part, I think the characters are the most important part.
So you explained how this particular series began. Was Morgan's character the first character that you began with, or did she sort of come in later on?
Nope, she was the first character. Well, actually, her dog Newt was the first character that I came up with, to be honest.
Yay!
Who was modeled very much after our 10-year-old English cream golden retriever, who is one of the smartest, gentlest, most empathic dogs I've ever had. And he totally ruined us for ever having another dog. And despite that, we went ahead and got another one. And now we're kind of regretting that decision. But yeah, Newt was the first character. I just knew that whatever the main character, whatever, I knew it was going to be a female, and I knew she was going to have this dog that was going to be a part of her life and a part of her investigations. And I guess a lot of people have compared these books to Scooby-Doo. And I guess since maybe in the back of my mind, because I loved Scooby-Doo, that was part of my reasoning for doing that. I don't know. And I'm fine with that. And when people ask me for the elevator pitch for the books, I always say Scooby-Doo meets the X-Files, because that's kind of how they are. So Newt was first, and then Morgan, because I knew she was going to be the primary character. And then I actually came up with the secondary characters of her employees before I came up with her romantic interest of John. So I tend to do the main character and the world directly around that main character sort of first when it comes to developing those things.
So you had said that you started this with a 2-book contract. Do you see more coming after this? Is this
I'm working on book 5 now, and I don't know if there will be any more after that, because I'll be out of contract after book 5. The books seem to be selling pretty well, so I'm assuming that they will want to do some more, but the book industry is crazy, and who knows? So I can't be sure of that, but there will at least be a 5th one.
I am curious. I want to go back to something you mentioned before, just talking in general. It's so funny because especially when I introduce an author who has a pseudonym, and you'd explained kind of why you chose to use a pseudonym. I'm never really sure, do I introduce you as your real name or your pseudonym, because there are various reasons. Was wanting to become an author, was that really, and this is no shade to any of the patients who you served, had you always wanted to be an author? Was that kind of something you fell into, or always in the back of your mind?
No, I always wanted to be a writer, an author, and I spent most of my my 20s and early 30s trying to write short fiction and get it published, and I had no success with that at all. I don't write short very well, and it took me a long time to figure that out and realize it. So when I started writing novel-length works, I did get my first 3 novels were published with HarperCollins, and they were published under my real name. When the 3rd book came out, actually right before the 3rd book came out, HarperCollins, well, the whole publishing industry in New York was kind of undergoing a bunch of changes. And there was this thing out there called the ebooks, and nobody knew what they were going to what effect they were going to have on the publishing industry. And some people thought they were going to be the death of books. And it was just this kind of big wide panic. And a lot of the big publishers were buying up little publishers, and they were cleaning house. And HarperCollins decided to get rid of their mass market paperback division, and which is the division that I was in. And some of the authors, they moved into the hardcover division. The rest of the authors got dropped, and I was amongst those who were dropped. And that happened before my book came out. So my book got no promotion, no marketing, no push whatsoever. The sales on it were bad. My first 2 books with them sold pretty good, but this 3rd one didn't sell well at all. And I no longer had a publisher. And then a year or 2 later, my agent got so fed up with the whole industry, she decided to quit and retire. So right after my writing career took off, it came to a screeching halt, and I had no publisher or agent. So I spent a few years writing some other stuff that I ended up self-publishing, some other novels. And eventually there was a project I was working on for a long time, where I wanted to communicate some of the humor and the crazy situations that happen in medicine, particularly ER settings, because that's where I worked a lot and where I liked it the most. I wanted to communicate that and share that with other people. And I lived in Richmond, Virginia when I first started doing this. That's where I lived when my first books were published. And I kept setting it in that general area, and I couldn't make it work. I kept going back to it and trying to write it, and it didn't work. When I finally ended up moving to Wisconsin, I decided to change the setting of that book and tackle it once again and make it Wisconsin. And suddenly it just all worked, because Wisconsin had the right amount of quirkiness and fun aspects to it that I needed to make the book fun, but also kind of serious. and small town, living in a small town here, as opposed to Richmond, Virginia, which is a fairly big area. And so I struggled for a while to find a publisher for that, went through a couple of agents, had a bunch of rejection letters, but eventually did get another agent, and she was able to sell that to Kensington Books. But when it came time for the book to come out, or right before a book came out and before they were going to print it, they said, we want you to come up with a pseudonym because the last book that you had under Beth Amos didn't sell that well. And so the book buyers are going to look back and say, Beth Amos, they're going to look at that book and say, ooh, she didn't sell well, so we're not going to buy any more of her stuff. So we want to pitch you as a newly discovered author, and we want you to come up with a pseudonym. So I was like, okay. I ended up picking, I think I picked my son's, well, I know I picked my son's name for the last name, Ryan. My middle name is Anne, and I was going to go with Anne Ryan. They thought that was a little too common. So Annelise was my name in German class in high school. So that's how we came up with that one. And the books, the Maddie Winston mysteries, are a fun, kind of medically oriented mysteries with a main character who is a nurse but ends up going to work for a medical examiner. And so there's a lot of dark humor, death humor, those kind of things in the books. And then while I was working on those books, one of my editor at Kensington said, I've always imagined a series in a Cheers kind of setting, a bar, a pub, something like that. Do you think you could come up with an idea for mysteries in a bar in Wisconsin? Because even then, Wisconsin was popular and mysteries. And I said, bars in Wisconsin are pretty much hand in hand. So yeah, I think I can do that. But when it came time again for the book to get printed and published, they said, there's just one thing. We want you to come up with another pseudonym. And I was like, but why? And they said it was because they didn't want the sales on the new series to affect the sales on the old one in case the new one tanked and vice versa. So they just wanted to once again pitch me as a newly discovered author and do this new series. So I came up with the name of Allison K. Abbott. I picked the last name of Abbott because I knew that in the bookstores, in the mystery section, eye level, top shelf are all the last names that start with A. So I picked Abbott for that. And I picked Allison K because that and the initials were AKA. And that was my little inside joke at having to pick out another pseudonym. So that series went for 6 books. So Allison K. Abbott only wrote the 6-book series, hasn't written any others. And I've been writing as Annelise Ryan since. So that's the story of the pseudonyms.
Well, thanks. That's actually really interesting because
Yeah.
I do always wonder that, and we do talk to a lot of authors that have pseudonyms, like I said, for various reasons. But talking about it from a publishing standpoint is fascinating. Well, this series is a lot of fun. I am always a fan of cozy small town stuff, and yeah, like I feel like it is character driven. The monsters are sort of, I don't want to say set dressing, but it really does build the world out. And I think it's a lot of fun. So thank you so much for chatting with us about this and
Well,
educating
thanks
us
for having
about
me.
cryptids. Are you a skeptic yourself? Like how
I've
do
been a
you and
nurse.
Morgan feel differently about these things?
No, Morgan and I have pretty much the same approach. Is I like plausible existability, but I can't be convinced that any of them exist unless I see them with my own eyes. And I'm a pretty scientifically oriented person, so I think that any chance of a cryptid actually existing is either going to be something under the seas or in the deep lakes, because those are really the only places left on this planet that we haven't fully explored, or something from outer space, unless you get into like alternate dimensions and that kind of thing. So, I am a skeptic and I would require proof, but I spent a lot of time living in Washington State. And so Bigfoot is huge out there. So I've always been in support of the idea of Bigfoot. I've been to Lake Champlain and seen they actually have a little monster crossing sign in the town, in one of the towns that borders Lake Champlain. And then a billboard down a little road that has the names and dates of all the sightings that have occurred. So I think it's like kind of a fun thing for people to explore and think about, and maybe just a little bit of an escape from the reality of our lives, which these days is almost too real. So Yeah, I mean, I would like to believe that there's creatures out there that we haven't discovered, and they do discover new animals
Yeah.
all the time that we didn't know, in the Amazon jungle or in the water. So
Yeah.
it's always possible.
Thank you so much. This was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast, and we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.